Welcome to A Year of War and Peace. I'm your host, Brian E. Denton. A Year of War and Peace is a daily, year-long, chapter-by-chapter reading of and meditation on Leo Tolstoy's epic novel, War and Peace. In these videos and podcasts, you'll be treated to a free reading of one chapter per day of the novel, plus a reflective essay I've written individually tailored to that day's chapter. These readings are offered for free, though if you'd like to support me, you can do so in one of three ways. First, you could purchase my ebook, A Year of War and Peace. It features the entire novel, plus all of my reflective essays, and it's only $2.99 on Amazon.com. You could also become a patron at patreon.com/Brian E. Denton. If you sign up there, you'll receive a sonnet once a month, plus a link to an ebook of my collected sonnets. Finally, if you like, you can make a one-time donation to my PayPal account. The email there is brianedenton@gmail.com. You can also use that email to contact me. I'd be happy to hear from you. Your support is greatly appreciated. Today's reading and reflection is from chapter 280. Chapter 280. Next day, the decrepit Kutuzov, having given orders to be called early, said his prayers, dressed, and, with an unpleasant consciousness of having to direct a battle he did not approve of, got into his calichet and drove from Lechovka, a village 3.5 miles from Tarutino, to take the place where the attacking columns were to meet. He sat in the calichet, dozing and waking by turns, and listening for any sound of firing on the right as an indication that the action had begun, but all was still quiet. A damp, dull autumn morning was just dawning. On approaching Tarutino, Kutuzov noticed cavalrymen leading their horses to water across the road along which he was driving. Kutuzov looked at them searchingly, stopped his carriage, and inquired what regiment they belonged to. They belonged to a column that should have been far in front and in ambush long before then. It may be a mistake, thought the old commander-in-chief. But a little further on he saw infantry regiments with their arms piled, and the soldiers only partly dressed, eating their rye porridge and carrying fuel. He sent for an officer. The officer reported that no order to attack had been received. How? Kutuzov began, but checked himself immediately and sent for a senior officer. Getting out of his calichet, he waited with drooping head and breathing heavily, pacing silently up and down. When Aitchin, the officer of the general's staff whom he had summoned, appeared, Kutuzov went purple in the face, not because that officer was to blame for the mistake, but because he was an object of sufficient importance for him to vent his wrath on. Trembling and panting, the old man fell into a state of fury in which he sometimes used to roll on the ground, and he fell upon Aitchin, threatening him with his hands, shouting and loading him up with gross abuse. Another man, Captain Brozin, who happened to turn up and who was not at all to blame, suffered the same fate. "What sort of another blackguard are you? I'll have you shot! Scoundrels!" yelled Kutuzov in a hoarse voice, waving his arms and reeling. He was suffering physically. He, the commander-in-chief, a serene highness who everybody said possessed powers such as no man ever had in Russia, to be placed in this position, made the laughingstock of the whole army. "I needn't have been in such a hurry to pray about today, or have been kept awake thinking everything over all night," thought he to himself. "When I was a chit of an officer, no one would have dared to mock me so. And now—" He was in a state of physical suffering, as if from corporal punishment, and could not avoid expressing it by cries of anger and distress. But his strength soon began to fail him, and looking about him, conscious of having said much that was amiss, he again got into his calichet and drove back in silence. His wrath, once expended, did not return, and blinking feebly, he listened to excuses and self-justifications. Ermolov did not come to see him till the next day, and to the insistence of Benningsen, Konovitsyn, and Toll that the movement had miscarried should be executed another day. And once more, Kutuzov had to consent. All right, so that concludes my reading of chapter 280 of War and Peace. I will now proceed to my reflection on the same. A Year of War and Peace, day 280. Abide the outcome in the dark. History is histrionics, a loud and bedeviled lunging about by blind men on a stage they do not understand. Think, too, argued the ancient Athenians in Thucydides' great history, of the great part that is played by the unpredictable in war. Think of it now, before you are actually committed to war. The longer a war lasts, the more things tend to depend on accidents. Neither you nor we can see into them. We have to abide their outcome in the dark. Fortune, or maybe even her dim-witted cousin, Chance, is the great general in life and war. Kutuzov, long a proponent of a variation of this view in theory, finds himself aghast at it in practice today. He wakes up reluctant to execute a battle he does not approve of. He says his prayers, and then he heads off to the fight. Along the way, he finds cavalrymen leading their horses to water, but they're supposed to be way ahead, waiting in ambush. Moving along, he encounters an infantry regiment out of position. Everything is a mess. Nothing is going according to plan. Unpredictability and accident reign. He's furious. He berates his inferiors for not executing his orders. Later, having purged his frustration, he calms down and accepts the situation as yet another fact of life to which he must consent. The orders will be executed tomorrow. Here Tolstoy presents two responses to the vicissitudes of life. The first is anger and frustration. Anger and frustration cause Kutuzov headaches and physical fatigue. The second response is tranquil acceptance of the way things are. More often than not, in this world where we must abide in the dark, our response is closer to anger and frustration than tranquil acceptance. Judging from Kutuzov's experience, however, it might be better to work on acceptance. Daily meditation. With respect to what may happen to thee from without, consider that it happens either by chance or according to providence, and thou must neither blame chance nor accuse providence. Marcus Aurelius, Meditations. All right, so that concludes my reading of and reflection on chapter 280. I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks so much for listening. Remember that if you'd like to support me, you can do so either by purchasing the ebook, A Year of War and Peace, becoming a patron at patreon.com, or making a one-time donation to PayPal. The links to all that are below. You're also going to see down in the description from now on my Amazon wish list for books and movies. And if you decide to support me by purchasing one of those, we can set up a Zoom call so we can talk about that purchase if you want to talk about a certain book or a movie with me. Your support is greatly appreciated. Tomorrow we're going to be reading and reflecting on chapter 281 of War and Peace. I hope you'll join me. Until then, take care of yourselves and others.